Listeners, I'm so excited I have with us today Melissa Loble, and she is Instructure's Chief Academic Officer and a champion for crucial customer-focused topics like data usage and privacy. And it's her personal mission to drive innovation in our customer experience and enable customers to leverage our solutions in engaging and effective learning environments. She spent 20 years in educational technology, working for a number of technology suppliers and educational institutions and has led teaching leadership courses on managing technology for educational change. She has a master's from Teachers College and also an MBA from Columbia Business School. Welcome to the show, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I know you're joining us from across the pond over in
I
Oslo. Quite dark.
am. Yes.
I love it. It's like
It's
a
been
glow in the dark feel.
absolutely. It's been such a great experience connecting with educators over here, but the dark part I've had to get used to a little bit.
I bet. I bet. Well, tell us, with all of your years of experience and kind of keeping a pulse on the latest trends in education, what are you seeing right now?
Yeah, so it's such an interesting place to be in education right now. I mean, we're seeing a number of key things. I think the biggest thing we're seeing, though, is the focus on lifelong learning and understanding that learners are
Mhm.
coming to us at different stages in their life in education. And we need to figure out how best to serve them at those various stages in their life. So that's a unique thing. It's far from the traditional teaching and learning experience that we've, had for the last 20 years.
Yeah, yeah, it's not just the K through 12 and then maybe the higher ed and then
Exactly.
maybe a graduate degree or PhD. It's not linear anymore.
Not at all. And while the degree still has significant value, so do alternative credentials for learners. And looking how to either do I balance my degree with other experiences and credentials, or do I start to stack credentials towards a
Mhm.
degree because I'm doing so many other things in my life, right? I'm working full time while I'm going to school now, or I'm caring for my family while I'm going to school time, or both, right? And
Yeah.
so it's this interesting intersection of seekers looking to do some more traditional education alongside new and more workforce aligned learning experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned credentials, and I had
Hmm.
kind of this, I don't know what to say, argument, debate with my
Ooh.
stepdad, who's 22, and a great, smart, really hard worker. But education, like the traditional education path, just I could just tell was not for her. Not a great test taker,
Hmm.
different way of learning than kind of the methodical memorization type of learning that we do a lot in the United States. And I kept saying, like, get a credential, get like a marketing certificate, do something like social media certification, something. So we're still working on it. But
I love
um,
that.
but the higher ed, like you said, like the ROI, when I think back to when I graduated undergrad in 2004 as a kid that, was a Pell Grant recipient, didn't have any money to put towards college. It was all scrapping, working and scrapping together
Hmm.
stuff. I got through college with $10,000 of debt. Like that's just unheard of today because all the financial support has left the system. And so I'm just seeing all kind of these headwinds come together as what you're talking about, as people kind of piecing together degrees or doing them while working is creating a totally different expectation and learning environment for folks. What do you see as the big shifts, like higher ed, these certification companies? What are they doing to address this?
Yeah, so I think a part of this big shift too is new generations want different things out of their learning experiences. They have expectations of an ROI for themselves on that, right? You talked about debt, and students are much more savvy, and some of the younger generations are thinking, is 50,000 or $100,000 worth of debt actually worth it for the career trajectory that I want to take? Or can I actually get there without incurring that? Can I get there in more workforce aligned experiences? Can I get there in experiences that are crafted more for me, as a deeply interested, engaged learner, but then once again is looking for a more contextual experience. So it's been interesting to watch both sort of the generational changes that are happening and how learners expect different things alongside the workforce saying, maybe you aren't actually giving us everything we need, right? We've for a long time needed deep technical skills. Now we need a combination of technical and soft skills. Where are the best places for you to get those so that you're, as prepared as possible to either start that career trajectory or continue on it, right? So
Yeah.
these pressures are sort of pushing traditional higher education kind of in a box. It's like, how are you going to respond to learners wanting different experiences, learners bringing in different experiences and different contexts into their world, and then how are you going to manage for people are expecting, how does this align directly to my career choices or just my life choices that I want to make post whatever this looks like? So I feel for higher education because they need to adapt to a changing marketplace alongside a changing learner. And trying to do all of that in a structure that hasn't changed a lot over the last 20 to 30 years is really challenging. But there's so many opportunities again for it in that.
Mm. Yeah. Well, you mentioned soft skills, or as I like to call them, human skills,
Yes.
becoming increasingly important, which is kind of counterintuitive with the rise of AI. I think everyone thinks that they need these AI skills, but the way I see
Yeah.
it is AI can do a lot of, summation, a lot of the technical stuff, like running really tricky Excel spreadsheets is probably not something we're going to need as much in the future. I'm just guessing with AI.
I'm with you.
And so that pivot to human skills, and one of the voids I
Yeah.
see as a higher education faculty member is critical thinking skills.
Mm.
And I'm always trying to coach that in classes that I have. So I teach organizational behavior, so that lends itself
Mm.
to this nicely. But decision making skills, critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, like I'm curious, Melissa, like what educators can do to, well, first of all, I feel free to disagree or agree with me on those areas, but what are we doing to equip people with these types of skills, these human skills?
Yeah, I so agree with you about these human skills because it's almost like we've over-architected towards technical skills. And then, like you said, AI is dropped into the world, and suddenly a lot of those technical skills aren't going to be needed, especially entry-level skills, right? So your
Mhm.
example of being able to manipulate a complex spreadsheet, right? Data analytics, there's so many, even intro coding, there are so many components that AI can do, but it's that human skill set that I think we're all acknowledging AI can't replace. Yet, how do we help education sort of re-architect itself? And how do we help teachers think about those skills? I think part of the problem is, and I've taught like you have in leadership courses, and we teach how to apply those skills, but we don't actually teach how do you build those skills, right? And
Oh.
we're not giving sort of experiential learning opportunities where when learners come in, they may not have any of this experience. They may not have been exposed to how do I decision make? How do I fail fast? How do I have courage? I've heard this a lot lately. So building courage, building confidence. They may not have been exposed to this given some of their pandemic experiences, given the
Mhm.
changes in education over the last 10 years. And so now we have students where we may say in leadership courses, you need to think about these different leadership theories, but they've never had an opportunity to develop those or apply those.
Mm.
So I think some advice for teachers, I think it's to think about the scenarios or the settings and
Mhm.
be over explicit about what you're teaching and why you're teaching. Help learners understand themselves as a learner. Help them see this is a human skill. This
Mhm.
activity is helping you apply something, yes, that we're learning in the course. But at the same time, these are expectations around the human skills underneath this to be successful in this. Build rubrics that align to those human skills, right? There's opportunities to be much more explicit about this and much more evident with learners on how they're building these, because that also becomes important not only for them to be more prepared for the workplace, but actually to demonstrate their unique capabilities for the workplace, right? It's one thing to
Mhm.
say I'm a good decision maker. It's another thing to say I have applied different decision making approaches. Here's my style, and here's a scenario in which I did that in my classes and how I've thought through my role in decision making.
Yeah, one of the tools I really like that you can get these pretty easily from Harvard Business Review or HBR Publishing for educators, but simulations are really fun to your
Yes.
point.
Yes.
There's not as many of them to pick from as I'd like. There's a few good ones we've used for my decision making course that it's a class
Yeah.
favorite to your point. That's what they really want is the application piece or how to
Yeah.
build those skills through trial and error, put in those repetitions, right? And then cases, I mean, case-based approaches, and this is where I see AI helping educators. AI can make
Absolutely.
a pretty good case study. I have a fictitious one. I mean, you got to give it the right prompts and input, and
Mhm.
don't rely on it to write it all for you. But I have been wildly surprised by how wonderful it can take my content as I upload it and say, hey, I really need a case that tests the application of A, B, and C skill. And then, create some questions and, for like my final exam, something like organizational behavior, it's hard to test someone's knowledge. Like it's not like I always tell the students, like it's not
Hmm.
right or wrong. It's not super objective like a finance class or an accounting class. This is pretty subjective stuff. But I don't want to make it too easy. I think sometimes we think the human skills are so easy. Those classes are easy, like human resources and
Yeah.
marketing. It's not that they're easy, they're just nuanced. And I'm curious about this, Melissa. What I see is so critical in education is giving people context. When we don't have context, you don't know why, to your point, why this is important, like how you would
Yep.
apply, like what is the environment we're operating in. It just it just becomes like a memorization exercise. Like you just kind of regurgitate and it just goes through your brain rather than like sticking on to something that matters.
Hmm.
But as somebody that's tried to teach that, it's hard to teach. Like it's
It
very
is.
like meta. Like as I think about it
Hmm.
now, it's like thinking about thinking. I'm just curious, Melissa,
Hmm.
what your thoughts, if any, are on that.
Yeah, first of all, I totally agree. And having been a product of the case method, so in my MBA, it was all case method. And I think about, and that was very early on. That was in my 20s, and I am much older now. And I think about some of the scenarios that I've been placed in my own leadership role now. And I actually think back to the conversations in those case study classes, right? And how I thought about applying, like that gave me sort of this core skill, back to your point of context. And I think that's so incredibly valuable. That's where experiential learning can start to come into play as well. But what I think is interesting, you're so right about context. We need to create that. And this is also something that AIs can be pretty good at. They can do context, AI can do case, AI can even actually do some simulations if you have the right amount of both the right prompts and the kind of the right content to do that. You can start to build those settings. But that context, what's hard, I think, in higher education is for the non practitioners in their space, for the true researchers, the inventors, right? Some of those folks that have been in the space but always in academic, they also don't necessarily come with
Mhm.
the context. It doesn't come naturally. Now you are a practitioner, so you're going to naturally understand context, although as you say, it is hard to build that. That's a very time consuming and hard activity. At least you have experiences contextually that you can apply and start to create
Mhm.
these settings. So I think this is where, as we see more practitioners come into education to do particularly like
Mhm.
certificate programs or the non-traditional stuff, and then we
Mhm.
pair them alongside the traditional academics, they both can learn so much from each other around the fields and around the context in which you apply those
Mhm.
fields. And we can start to create this library of contextual, personally aligned learning experiences that learners are looking for. We also
Mm.
need help with industry. We also need industry help in this, right? So we need them to come to us, and they're also. So I teach, and I teach in the instructional design space. So it's a little, it's kind of the meta of I'm always in the weeds. All right, how do we teach? But what's interesting is, I've worked with instructional designers out in the field and said, give me some of the scenarios in which, you are
Mhm.
asked to do work. Where are you asked to apply this work? What are you asked to do? Can I leverage some of those as context to then turn that into a relatable experience that my students will then immediately go out into the workplace and potentially be exposed to, right? So there's
Mm.
this. there's ways to get at this and to leverage your colleagues or leverage industry in context of that. But we've never, as educators, we've always been taught it's your content, it's not your context. And now I think it's your context. And with AI helping you build content, your
Hmm.
role shifts as an instructor.
Yeah. Well, and so much of that's because of leaning so heavily on research and academic peer-reviewed papers, right? It is
Yep.
the
Yep.
content, the content, the content that's vetted, vetted, vetted.
Yeah.
And now that things are so hyper competitive, like the
Mhm.
time to put into these studies, things are changing so quickly, Melissa. Like, I just wonder what you think about if you could see into the future, knowing what you know now, what do you think some shifts are that we'll see in education as a result of all of this?
Gosh, I wish I had that crystal ball, because I think that would help. Like if we all had crystal balls, it would change the conversation. But I will say there was a couple of things that I do see changing. Um, I see, and we've already talked about some of them. I see this idea of making direct connection to the work and
Hmm.
and learners seeking career coaching from their instructors or from their faculty. I see this place where learning is about the content, it is about the academic nature, but it's still also about the human skills and the applicable work life skills, right? And
Hmm.
so we've released a readiness report and we unpacked through outside research that, for example, 87% of millennials don't feel prepared for the next their next
Hmm.
job or what their job may be. So how do we think about that, right? There's an academic or content stream or discipline stream as part of that. There's a application of that part of it. And then there's also an understanding of how does this relate to actually the day-to-day job you're going to do. And so I see a shift in what curriculum looks like, to blend all of that together as opposed to, either overly focus on the academics or there are some very discipline oriented programs that overly focus on the technical skills that you need. I see this blend. And then I think layered on top of that, and we've talked a lot about this as an education space, but AI literacy is going to become ever so more important because it's not going to be necessarily how do you use the tools, but why do you use the tools and
Hmm.
how do you acknowledge your use of those tools in your larger sort of human AI contribution back into your work. And I think
Hmm.
that's going to be critical as well. Those are two big changes I see in education. The last one I'll mention is, and I've chatted with educators a lot about this, teachers want to do the right thing. We all want to do this, like we really do. But we're kind of set environments. Unfortunately, we're incentivized not necessarily to work towards this new workforce, or or how we're regulated isn't necessarily aligning to this. So, and I think institutions are seeing that, and so I think we're going to start to see incentives change. I think we're going to start to see what our regulatory requirements around outcomes change so that we can all
Hmm.
move learning to prepare humans for their communities and their workplace.
Yeah, yeah, that'll be interesting to watch.
It'll
Yeah,
be
it's
interesting. It hasn't happened, right? So this will be interesting.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think you've given us a lot of like incredible just thoughts on what's happening, why the pivots are happening in education. And I think the last question I have for you, Melissa, is for a lot of our listeners are, corporate, learning leaders,
Hmm.
HR leaders. What do you
Yeah.
think this means on the corporate side? Like what do you see as like
Yeah.
how does learning and development change there?
Yeah, I love that you're asking that question because I think as we talk about the shifts in learning, we often immediately arrive at higher education. And then we go to K-12. And then we
Mhm.
forget that there's this whole corporate learning space, right? And talent development space that has opportunities to learn and grow from everything we're learning in our other parts of the education industry. Think what it means for corporate learning is a shift away from pure compliance training to a combination of, um, again, those technical skills to do your job, but more those contextual skills or those human skills. And oftentimes, corporate
Mhm.
training doesn't, it'll get after the human skills and right? You teach your employees about how to build your brand or how to be on a team or how to lead a team. But it's
Hmm.
more than that. And if we have employees coming into the workforce that haven't had a chance to build confidence, courage, how to fail, how to decision make, like that is such a great example. Companies are going to need to do this. I've experienced this. I
Yeah.
know we have it in Structure where we've had employees come in and they just don't even, they don't have a sense of professionalism or how do I step into the workplace now and immediately be successful with my human skills. I have all these technical skills to offer, but how do I do that? So I think companies are going to have to start thinking differently about what they're doing in their training and development opportunities and how are they folding in the soft skills in addition to the company specific skills. We also know that's what learners want.
Yeah.
We've heard this from employees, right? I'm seeking. I've heard this, especially if you look at millennials or even Gen Z, they'll say, "I'm going to a company because I know they're going to develop me." That doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily they're going to develop me in excellent spreadsheet skills. They're going to develop me as a future leader in the career track I want, and so it
Yeah.
puts a different importance on what we're training. And then I
Hmm.
also think it gives, hopefully, corporate learning an opportunity to partner with higher education and they can kind of reinvent themselves together because I
Yeah.
think there's opportunities for those two to join forces
Hmm.
and do all of this human skill and technical skill development together.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you're saying all that as somebody that straddles both worlds, the corporate
Hmm.
side. What I've seen is, yeah, a lot more scenario-based application, a lot less me
Yep.
talking, and a lot more me listening and facilitating.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you, like application-based content focused on human skills with less lecture
Hmm.
and compliance focus and more facilitative coaching types of experiences. The other thing is like this one and done concept. Well, we train them on these skills, like check the box.
Hmm.
We know learning has a long arc, and so meeting people where they're at with some reinforcement and some open coaching time to practice using the skills and reflecting on how that's
Absolutely.
going, I also suspect will be really important. So it'll be
Oh yeah,
fun.
retrieval
Yeah,
practice tells us this, right?
yeah,
Right. We need to be constantly coming back and using those things that we're building into our memory in order to keep applying them in new and novel situations. But if we don't do that, right, exactly what you described, we've lost this opportunity to continue to develop
mhm,
learners, especially as they need to build resistance and they need to be able to understand how to respond to change because we don't know what the future of work is going to look like. It's radically changing. So
yeah,
it's so important what you're saying.
yeah. Well, I appreciate that. It's funny. It's like over the years, having done this for I don't know, 12 years or so, adult learning has been just interesting to see the journey because I always kind of felt that gut instinct watching people in the classroom. And I didn't have research to back this up, but when you
Mhm.
got people talking, you got people learning. Like me
Mhm.
talking at people, you can see
Yes.
people just kind of like, like they're absorbing maybe one in every five things you say, but
Yep.
hush and let people process things on their own and then discuss it with somebody else. You can see like the aha moments happen live with a good role
Yeah.
play exercise, with a good scenario-based learning approach, with something that's like reflective in nature about your leadership,
Mhm.
brand and style and goals. So I think the thing that we've always struggled with in the education space, especially in higher ed and K through 12, is like the context. Like they just don't
Mhm.
have as much context and lived experience. And so when I
Yeah.
was teaching crucial conversations last semester, loved that. Like, 20, 22-year-old
Yeah.
people, adults, I want to call them kids, but they are adults.
Yeah.
And they would say things like, well, my roommate's not doing the dishes. And I was like, I wish that was my crucial conversation, Melissa. I've got bigger problems than that. But that is really like what's on their mind. And so it's almost
Absolutely.
like prepping people before they're even doing it, which is really difficult. So again, this kind of just-in-time learning where you're
Mhm.
partnering across makes a lot of sense.
I love that crucial conversation story. I think about, so I had mentioned earlier I did my MBA. I did my MBA very early on. I had like two jobs, and that's all I did. And now I think about it, I'm like, man, I had no experience whatsoever going into that. I was doing some of the same thing. I was a high school teacher, and I was like, well, in my classroom, this is what I would do. And it was a lot different than the person sitting next to me that had done some,
Mhm.
corporate acquisition and struggled through it and had failed, right? And so I think about that. It's like, but in order to prepare the future workplace, to your point, we do have to think about all the generations that are coming in, and how do we create these environments that if you don't have that experience, we can replicate that to a certain degree. And then, like you said, continue to build on that, whether it's in the higher education organization or in the company that you go work for. How do we keep building on that as you evolve your learning and your experiences over time?
Yeah. I love that. Well, keep on this amazing research and guidance journey. We'll be sure to link to some of the resources and research that your team has done, Melissa. But tell our listeners, how can they follow you and support your work?
Yeah, please do. Just follow instructure.com. And a lot of the work we're posting out on LinkedIn and our research and studies, working with folks like you, Julie, to like ensure that the word is getting out on what we're finding out. And then feel free to follow me as well, Melissa Loble. You'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm Melissa at instructure.com. Reach out anytime because we'd love to listen and learn and be part of the larger community, figuring out what this future of learning looks like.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for your voice and for the wonderful work your team is doing.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.